Today we're going to go ahead and wrap up our lesson on the Roman Empire by talking about the fall of Rome. Over the last couple class periods, we've been moving towards this moment with the barbarian invasions and a little introduction to the fall of Rome and the reasons why Rome is going to fall according to our film. You see that year again, 476 AD, and one thing that I want you to notice here from the start is whenever you talk about the fall of Rome, usually the fall is in quotes, and that's something that we're going to have to answer at the end of class today, okay? So today we're going to get a little reintroduction to what was going on in Rome. We're going to talk about all of the reasons why Rome is going to fall on many levels. First thing we're going to talk about is just an overview of where we're at, pretty much where we left off in our lesson. So the Pax Romana is going to end, all right? That time of peace that Augustus ensured for 200 years in Rome, the longest peace that's been in that area, the region to this day, from 31 BC to 180 AD. The Pax Romana is going to end with the rule of a very famous Roman emperor named Marcus Aurelius. Now, Marcus Aurelius was said to be the last of the good emperors, the last of the good emperors. Now, that's a little deceiving. There were emperors after him that are going to be good emperors, but he was called that, and that's a name that we're going to go with. Now, Marcus Aurelius is going to appoint Commodus to be the emperor, and if you recall, Commodus was the emperor that was killed by a wrestler. He was the focus of the character in the movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe that we talked about already. After Commodus, Rome is going to experience a time of bad rulers, and that happens in all empires. You have a time of good rulers, you have a time of bad rulers, and in this case, after Marcus Aurelius dies or appoints Commodus and Commodus takes his place, there's going to be 100 years of turmoil in Rome to follow. Now, an introduction to some things that are happening at this time period in Roman history. People are getting taxed like crazy all over the empire to pay for the army. This is something we've already talked about. Today in the United States, we spend gazillions of dollars on our military all over the world. For the Romans, it was no different. We know that the backbone of Roman society was its military. The reason why they were able to create an empire was because of the military. Well, you got to pay for it. You got to pay for it. And that came in the form of taxes from people. Now, we also already learned that the farmers are overproducing. All right, there's a lot of overproduction. Farmers are left with a surplus of crops, which causes inflation, which is a really big problem. So taxes for the army, the people are complaining about paying money for that. And then the backbone of Roman society, the farmers are in trouble once again in Roman history. Now, the empire actually almost collapses in the 200s, and we almost do not have an opportunity to talk about that year, 476 AD, that we've mentioned for about 2 classes now. It almost collapsed, okay, for the reasons that we just talked about. However, there will be a revival of Rome in the 200s, and it has to do with 2 emperors. The first emperor that I'm referring to is a guy named Diocletian. Now, he's going to take the reign in 284 AD, and he's going to do 2 things to improve Rome immediately. One is on a political level, one is on an economic level. The first thing that Diocletian does is he divides the empire. He realized that the Roman Empire was too big to govern from Rome. So he divided the empire. And we've seen this on a couple maps that we've worked with recently. You can see that the map on the slide is showing you those 2 divisions. We're going to break Rome into the western part of the Roman Empire and the eastern part of the Roman Empire. And eventually, there's going to be emperors that are going to rule from both places, okay? That's going to make it a lot easier to govern, and he realized that it was too big to govern, and that's why he divided the empire. So there's a political reason why Rome is going to be revived in the 200s. Now, Diocletian is going to do something economically which is going to help Rome tremendously. Now, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, economic problem in the history of Rome was inflation. That's when there's a rise in prices of goods that results in a decrease of the value of money. Well, how do you solve it? Well, Diocletian fixed prices of goods all over the empire, which stopped inflation, which means a chicken sold for the same price in Constantinople as it did in Gaul. A bale of hay, certain goods. all were fixed prices, all right, which meant crops were the same, and so on, which he used to stop inflation. And thank goodness he did this, because like I said to start this slide in this section, the empire almost collapses in the 200s AD. Now, Constantine was the other emperor that I'm referring to that is going to take the place of Diocletian. He's going to rule in 312 AD, and he will do something that will affect our world forever religiously, okay? Now, we've had some good lessons on the Romans' view of the Christians, and we know from at this point that the Christians and the Romans' paths did collide. We know what happened to Jesus. When Jesus dies, we know that Christianity is going to spread like wildfire, even without the Romans really appreciating and wanting to be Christian. Well, Constantine was an emperor that takes the reign in 312 AD, and he is going to be really the first emperor to openly tolerate Christians. And there's one very famous thing that Constantine did on his deathbed. He is going to be baptized. He is going to be converted to Christianity. And for you art folks in the crowd, you can see there are paintings that depict this very famous moment in religious history. Since the Roman emperor was now Christian, wow, Christianity now could spread without limitations all over the Roman Empire and inevitably all over Europe. And Constantine was responsible for that. Now, here's the spread of Christianity. Speaking of it, these are Christian areas in orange on the map in 325, shortly after Constantine began to rule. This map depicts the orange areas of just little Christian pockets all over the Roman Empire. Not even 300 years later, look how Christianity spread. You can see the yellow areas to 600 AD represents how and where Christianity spread, okay? And that was a game changer for the Christians when Constantine converted to Christianity on his deathbed. Now, Constantine's also going to move the center of the Roman Empire to a place called Constantinople, all right? Today, we know that it's Istanbul in Turkey, and it was a very important place for the Romans, okay? During this time period when Rome and the barbarians had moved in a little bit, it was important to move that capital of the empire to Constantinople. Not exactly the capital, but it became a cultural center because it was protected, as we'll talk about in future lessons, and it was a central place where the Romans could rule from, basically, and help to rule the eastern part of the new Roman Empire. Let's get into the causes why Rome fell. All right, so the most important part of this entire lesson is to go through the military, political, social, and economic reasons why Rome fell. Okay, so from a military standpoint, all right, we don't have to spend too much time on this because we just did a huge slides activity on the Germanic barbarian invasions, all right? So a military reason why Rome fell were the barbarians, all right? They couldn't fight them off. They just, the waves and waves and waves of barbarians into Roman territory was too much for the army to handle. So a military reason why Rome is going to fall is because of these Germanic barbarian invasions. Now, there's a real famous battle that we'll stop and talk about here. It's called the Battle of Adrianople, and it's going to happen in 378 AD. Now, at this point, we're going to get a chance to revisit the tribe called the Visigoths. The Visigoths. Now, the city of Rome is going to fall in 476 AD, and it's a direct result of the Battle of Adrianople. This was a huge battle between the Visigoths and the Romans, where the Visigoths are absolutely going to destroy the Romans at this famous battle, okay? It's going to take place just north of a place called Adrianople, which is in modern-day European Turkey. And the Romans are absolutely going to get thrashed by this, all right? It was part of something called the Gothic War, where the Goths, the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths are just going to open all-out war against the Romans everywhere. Now, because of that, the Visigoths had a direct route from Adrianople into the city of Rome. Now, the city of Rome is going to fall in 476 AD. The city of Rome is going to fall. And it's going to fall at the hands of the famous Visigoth leader, a guy named Odoacer. Odoacer. Now, the emperor of the time was a guy named Romulus Augustulus. Romulus Augustulus' fate is unknown. We do not know what happened to him, but we can pretty much have a general understanding that the Goths that rode into Rome that day were not very nice to the Roman Emperor Romulus Augustulus. And for that reason, Romulus Augustulus will be the last Roman emperor in the West, in the western part of the Roman Empire. Now, another military reason why Rome is going to fall is because as the empire went along, soldiers died, and you had to fill your army. So one thing that the Romans did was they hired foreign soldiers, hired foreign people to come and fight within the Roman army. Those hired soldiers are called mercenaries. Now, when the mercenaries were hired, the question was, were these foreign soldiers really loyal to Rome? The Roman army was built on citizen soldiers that early on it was based on discipline and loyalty. And Rome had created the most fiercest fighting force ever in history up until this part of our lessons. Well, now you have some foreigners coming in, and were they really loyal to Rome? Did they really have Rome's best interest in mind when they were lining up against the barbarians on a battlefield? Okay? And that's going to be another military reason why Rome is going to fall. Let's talk about some social reasons. So when we talk about social reasons, we're talking about the people, all right? We're talking about the people and what were the people thinking, okay? Well, over time, there was an erosion of values, okay? Like I said a second ago, Rome was founded on discipline. Rome was founded on loyalty. Rome was founded on devotion and a love for Rome. Well, over the years, those values eroded away. And Roman people weren't feeling Rome anymore, okay? And it's a very basic concept. There was no patriotism, all right? People were not proud of Rome anymore, all right? And that's what patriotism, nationalism. There was not a feeling of pride to be Roman, okay? Now, one example of something the emperors were doing to erode these values and turn the people against the leaders was something called bread and circuses. Now, bread and circuses was very simple. Bread and circuses basically means when the Roman emperors were taking Roman money, and instead of giving it back to the people, Roman emperors were holding huge leisure activities, gladiator battles. You can see chariot races, and you can see on the slide there the largest race course in Rome. The Circus Maximus is where you would go, as we talked about earlier, on a Friday night to go and watch the chariot races, okay? That overall concept is bread and circuses. The emperors were spending money on, and spending the money on the wealthy people that could afford to do these things, but the overall common person in Rome was struggling financially, yet they were watching the emperor hold all these elegant events for rich people. That concept is bread and circuses, and that's going to be a social reason why Rome is going to fall. Now, let's talk about some political reasons. We already touched on a couple of them already, all right? But when we talk about political reasons, we're talking about the government, and we're going to talk about the emperors, okay? We're going to throw some stats at you. Now, Rome, just like every single place ever on earth, or any government or any empire, had a history of good emperors, had a history of bad emperors. We saw that in Egypt, we saw that in Mesopotamia, we saw that in Greece. There's a history of good emperors, and there's a history of bad emperors, or leaders in the other places' cases, okay? Well, let's throw some stats at you. The stability of the Roman emperor was always in question pretty much throughout the time of the empire. For example, in 69 BC, there were 4 emperors in 1 year. 4 emperors in 1 year. That's a problem, okay? That's not a lot of stability, not very good emperors, and the people obviously were fighting back these emperors during that year. Now, let's take it a step further. From 235 to 284 AD, at a time of about 50 years, there was 20 emperors. 20 emperors in 50 years. That's a lot of emperors. That's a lot of rulers, and there's not a lot of stability there, okay? That's a political reason why Rome is going to fall. Now, in the last 50 years of Rome, there was 26 emperors. 26 emperors in 50 years, okay? So just by looking at those couple stats, you can see that those are a lot of emperors in a short amount of time. And that's going to be a political reason why Rome is going to fall. These emperors were oppressive. They ruled with a dictatorial means. They didn't rule with the republican mind like other earlier emperors did. By the end, these were dictators. These were absolute dictators, and the people weren't feeling the government. Now, also, there was corruption. Corruption was a problem in Rome throughout. But later on in the empire, obviously corruption was a problem. Were the people loyal to the emperor? And there were just obviously some big political problems here as the empire went along throughout. And those are going to be political reasons why Rome is going to fall. Now, also, dividing the empire was a political reason why Rome is going to fall. And let me explain why, okay? So Diocletian divided the empire. Now, if you're looking at that map and we're thinking about the lesson that we did on our barbarians and Germanic tribes that invaded Rome, the majority of those invasions happened in the West. It happened in the western part of the empire. Now, please write this down and please put a big star on this. When the western part of Rome was falling at the hands of the barbarian tribes, the eastern part did not help the West. The folks that were living in the green area on this map in the eastern part did not help the West. They did not send troops. They did not send men to help out the western part when the tribes invaded and the tribes took down the western part of the Roman Empire. Remember this for a future lesson. The East did not help the West. Now, let's finish up by talking about some economic reasons why Rome is going to fall, all right? So when we talk about economic reasons, we're talking about money. We're talking about cash. Okay, so we already touched on the taxes, all right? Heavy taxes placed on the people of Rome in order to fund this war machine, in order to fund their army that was spread out all over the Roman Empire. Now, also, farmers. We already talked about this concept a little bit, how rich, wealthy landowners created these latifundias and went to areas to bring back slaves that replaced farmers. Remember, farmers were the backbone of Roman society. They populated the army. They were the producers of food. Farmers suffered tremendously. It's a quiet underlying economic reason why Rome is going to fall. Now, listen to this. There's a huge population decline in Rome, which is going to affect Rome economically. As you can see on the chart here, you can see when Rome was at its height, it had 1 million people in AD 14. Fast forward 430 some years later, they only have 140,000 people in Rome, okay? That's a problem. That's a big economic problem. Now, the majority of the people that died, and the reason why there's a population decline was because of the wars, all right? Men were dying in battle. Disease becomes a problem in Rome, which is going to hurt and help the decline of the population of Rome. Eventually, it's going to lead to their collapse, and we'll talk about that right now. Okay, so probably the most important question that we have to answer today is, did Rome fall? Did Rome fall? And if you recall from my first slide, remember, the word fall was in quotes. It was in quotes. And I'm going to tell you right now, next class, whenever we take a test, you're going to have to explain why that word fall was in quotes. So let me make it simple for you. Did Rome fall? Yes and no. Yes and no. Let's make it simple. Yes, it did. No, it did not. Let's explain. Okay, so yes, the city of Rome is going to fall. 476 AD. The city of Rome is sacked by the Visigoths. All right, the city of Rome will be taken over. And yes, the western part of the Roman Empire is going to fall at the hands of the barbarian tribes. The city of Rome will fall. The western part of the Roman Empire will fall. Now, however, the eastern part of the Roman Empire is not going to be touched. It's barely touched by the barbarians. It is very hard for people to get through Constantinople there on the southwest part of the Black Sea. It's very hard. It's a fortified city. Barbarians didn't have surge tactics to get over the walls of Constantinople. They left the eastern part alone, all right? No barbarians barely got into the eastern part. All of the good stuff was in the western part. So the eastern part was saved because the barbarians didn't touch it. Now, the eastern part of the Roman Empire is going to live on for another 1,000 years. Now, it's going to take a new name. It's going to be called the Byzantine Empire, which is the focus of our next chapter's lesson. And it's going to continue the traditions that the Romans and the Christians created. It's going to survive all the way to the start of the Middle Ages, where the kings and the castles and the queens and all the fun stuff we talk about in medieval times comes around. The Byzantine Empire is going to be ruled by emperors. In fact, we're going to do extensive work on the most powerful and influential Byzantine Empire, a guy called Justinian. They're going to have beautiful, beautiful cathedrals that are built. One of the most famous ones is in Istanbul to this day. It's called the Hagia Sophia, which, a lesson for another day, is now a Muslim mosque. Used to be a Christian cathedral. So we can see how the Roman Empire fell and all the great details and stuff that we need to know.